Let me ask you a question. When you watch the news, or, when you're doom scrolling through your feed at 11 p.m., how do you feel? Do you feel informed, enlightened, or do you just feel angry?
Right.
Like that blood-boiling, jaw-clenched kind of angry. And here's the follow-up, the one that might sting a little. Is that anger yours, or is it a product that was manufactured, packaged, and then sold directly to you?
And that is really the uncomfortable question at the center of all this.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to see the culture war as this spontaneous thing, a clash of values. But what if it's actually a stable business partnership?
What if the enemies you see on screen are really partners? Enjoy a bold new take on book coverage with this extended analysis. More than just a summary, which we also include. This feature examines how the author shapes argument, builds influence, and earns, or loses, your trust, giving you the tools to read with sharper insight and greater discernment. Should you read this book, this should help. Also excellent for aspiring writers. If you find this expanded format valuable, we'd love to hear from you. Your feedback helps guide our future content. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation, powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis. Today we are diving into Hate Inc., Why Today's Media Makes Us Despise One Another by Matt Taibbi. And honestly, this book feels less like a traditional read and more like someone grabbing you by the shoulders and just shaking you awake.
It is definitely a polemic.
Yeah.
And our goal today isn't just to, walk through the chapters. We want to pop the hood.
Yeah.
We want to analyze how he actually builds this argument.
Looking at his rhetorical strategy here.
Yeah, his ethos, pathos, logos. We'll see where the argument is solid and, frankly, where it might start to crack under a little pressure.
Okay, so let's start with the core thesis. Because Taibbi is not pulling any punches here. He's saying the American media is broken.
Right.
And not broken like, oops, we made a mistake, but broken by design.
Broken by design is the perfect phrase for it. The central argument is that news media has evolved from being a reporting business into an anger-driven entertainment business.
He makes that sharp distinction, right, between information and understanding.
A very sharp distinction. He argues that we are drowning in information tickers, tweets, breaking news alerts, but we are absolutely starved for real understanding.
Because understanding is complex, and nuance doesn't sell ads.
That's the heart of the economic argument. Information is just data. But media companies figured out, especially after the internet just wrecked their old ad models, that they make a lot more money when audiences are polarized.
When they're angry.
When they're angry and when they're loyal to a specific team. So the product isn't news anymore. It's tribal hostility.
It's interesting you bring up that economic shift. Taibbi positions Hate Inc. as a kind of raucous update to that famous book by Noam Chomsky, Manufacturing Consent.
Right.
I haven't read Chomsky since college, and I'm guessing a lot of our listeners are in the same boat. Can you give us a quick refresh on how Taibbi is updating that theory?
Sure. So, back in the 80s, Chomsky and Herman argued that the media's job was to narrow public opinion.
To create consensus.
Exactly. To manufacture consent for what the establishment wanted. I mean, think about it. Everyone watched one of three channels, ABC, CBS, NBC, and they all basically said the same things in that same calm voice.
The Walter Cronkite era.
And that's the way it is. That's the one. But Taibbi says that model is dead. The internet completely killed it. In an age of 1 million cable channels and social media feeds, you can't get everyone to agree on anything. So the whole economic incentive flips.
You don't aim for uniformity anymore.
You aim for what he calls deliberate partisan balkanization.
Balkanization. That is a heavy term. It brings to mind, splitting everyone up into tiny warring states.
And that's the metaphor. It's all about capturing niche markets. You make money by picking a side, telling that side everything they want to hear, and this is the important part, telling them the other side is an existential threat.
So if you try to be neutral now, you have no audience. You just starve.
You starve.
Which brings us to what I thought was the most mind-bending part of the book. The mirror effect.
Two sides, one system.
Yes, because if you watch Fox News and then you flip over to MSNBC, it feels like war. They despise each other. It does not feel like a partnership.
Well, on the surface, it looks like total war.
Yeah.
But Taibbi's argument is that structurally, they're identical. They're mirrors of each other. They're partners in the same game.
Using the same playbook.
The exact same business logic, just for different micro audiences. They both need an enemy. They both need to boil complex issues down to good versus evil. They both need to keep that emotional temperature cranked all the way up.
So Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow might be saying opposite things.
But they're selling the same burger.
Just with different sauce.
Different sauce, yeah. They're selling validation. And Taibbi points to all the structural things we ignore, the urgent music, the scrolling tickers, the graphics that are literally designed to induce anxiety. Doesn't matter if you're on the red team or the blue team. The format is built to trigger the exact same dopamine receptors.
This does bring up the question of credibility, though. I mean, Taibbi is basically saying everyone is lying to you except for me. That's a bold claim. How does he build the ethos to get away with that?
That is where his background is absolutely crucial. This is the insider critic strategy. Taibbi's been a high-profile political journalist for decades. Rolling Stone, covering presidential campaigns. He was on the bus with all the other reporters.
He knows how the sausage is made.
He uses that resume to say, look, I know how the sausage is made because I've been in the factory.
So he's not an outsider throwing stones. He's inside the glass house.
Precisely. And he establishes this ethos of reluctant complicity. There are parts of the book where he straight up admits he benefited from this system. He talks about the rush of getting a big story, of being in the pack, of mocking the losers on the campaign trail.
That performative self-critique?
It's very effective. It separates him from the industry he's attacking. He isn't just pointing a finger at those corrupt journalists. He's indicting his own profession and, by extension, himself.
It's like the magician revealing the secret to the trick. It makes you trust him more because he's breaking that code of silence.
Right.
And speaking of codes, let's get into the mechanics. Taibbi breaks it all down into what he calls the media's number 10 rules of hate.
And these rules are fascinating. They're like a diagnostic tool. Once you hear them, you really can't unsee them when you turn on the news.
The one that just jumped out at me, and I see it everywhere now, is the rule: there are only two ideas.
The binary framing. This is essential for the anger model. You can't have nuance. You can't have 3 or 4 different perspectives on a tax bill.
Yeah.
There has to be idea A versus idea B.
You're either with us or you're with the enemy.
And that gets rid of the middle ground, which is where most of real life actually happens.
It turns all of politics into a light switch. On or off. Good or evil.
And that connects directly to another one of the rules. Hate people, not institutions.
Oh, this one is huge. Explain how that works, because it feels like we only ever talk about people now.
Well, it's the personalization of conflict. It's really hard to get a viewer to sit through a 5-minute segment about, say, systemic banking corruption. It's boring.
Right.
But it's incredibly easy to get them angry at a specific person. So the media turns politics into this soap opera of villains and heroes. It becomes about Trump or Pelosi or AOC instead of the actual policy details or the structural problems.
Which sets up his sports metaphor perfectly. He says news consumption is like being a sports fan. You're not watching to learn about the physics of a curveball. You're just watching to see your team win.
And he takes it even further with the wrestling analogy. This might be the most famous part of the whole book.
The kayfabe concept. I had never heard that word before reading this.
Kayfabe is, it's an insider term from professional wrestling. It refers to portraying staged events as if they're real.
Okay.
So in the ring, the wrestlers pretend to hate each other. They're screaming. They're hitting each other with chairs. They insult each other's families. The crowd goes absolutely wild. But backstage,
They're buddies.
they're colleagues. They're planning the next match over a beer.
And Taibbi is saying political pundits are doing the same thing.
He argues political punditry is pure kayfabe. The on-screen conflict is just performative theater to keep you glued to your seat. But off-screen, the pundits are all part of the same media elite. They go to the same parties in D.C. and New York. They have way more in common with each other than they do with their own audiences.
It really makes you feel like a bit of a fool for taking it so seriously, doesn't it? Like we're the fans in the stands, screaming our heads off, while the hero and the villain are high-fiving in the locker room.
That's the exact feeling he wants to create.
Yeah.
He wants you to feel like you've been played.
Before we get into the emotional impact of these tactics, and it does get darker than just wrestling, a quick mention of mindful moments. If you enjoy this kind of deep thinking, check out our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques inspiring reflection and rational thought. It's a great way to keep your brain engaged without all the rage bait.
So we've covered the logic, the business model, and the ethos, the insider critic. Now let's talk about the pathos, the emotion. Because Taibbi isn't just saying this system is annoying, he's saying it's actually dangerous.
He uses that term devotional anger. The word devotional really jumped out at me. It sounds almost religious.
It is religious in its intensity. The goal is to create a state of permanent hostility. It's not just about being informed, it's about being in a constant low-grade fight-or-flight mode. Taibbi argues this sustained internal propaganda creates powder kegs.
He even brings up historical analogies like the breakdown of Yugoslavia to hint at where this all leads.
That's a terrifying comparison. Yugoslavia fell apart into a brutal civil war.
Exactly. His point is that you can't spend decades telling people their neighbors are monsters who want to destroy their country and not expect consequences. Eventually, people start to believe it. Eventually, the rhetoric jumps off the screen and into the real world. But, and here's the twist, he turns a lens back on us, too. This is the part that stings the most. He argues we aren't just victims here.
We're addicts.
Yes.
He really invokes a sense of shame in the reader. He points out that we come back for our daily dose of outrage. We say we hate the division. We say, oh, I wish politics wasn't so toxic. And yet, we click on the stories that confirm our biases.
We tune into the shows that tell us we're right and they're wrong.
We are active participants in this economy. We are buying a ticket to the wrestling match every single night.
It's a hard pill to swallow. It shifts the responsibility from them to us. But look, we promised we would analyze the argument, not just cheer for it. So let's get into the strengths and weaknesses. Where does Taibbi's argument really shine, and where does it maybe fall apart?
Well, let's start with the big strength. I think the detribalization aspect is the book's greatest value. It exposes the rules of the game.
By showing you the script, he helps you stop reciting the lines.
Exactly. It encourages you to step out of your identity bubble and see your opponents as fellow citizens who are just being manipulated by the same machine, but on a different channel.
So it's promoting empathy, but in a very cynical way. Like, we're all being scammed, so let's band together against the scammers.
That's a good way to put it. However, we have to talk about the main criticism. The analysis brings up a big one: false equivalency, or both sides of it. This is where a lot of critics get off the bus.
Right. The argument that by saying both sides do it, Taibbi might be flattening some really important differences. Is the red team media really exactly the same as the blue team media?
That is the core critique. While it's probably true that both Fox and MSNBC use emotional manipulation and tribalism, critics argue there's an asymmetry in, say, factual rigor. They would say one side might engage in outright fabrication more often than the other.
And by painting them as identical mirrors, Taibbi risks treating bias as the same thing as disinformation.
Which is a very risky generalization. And that connects to the other issue: anecdotal evidence. The book is so readable because it's packed with these vivid, hilarious, and horrifying anecdotes. But anecdotes aren't data.
He cherry-picks the worst examples to make his point.
He does. And while those examples are real, a critic would ask, does this represent all of the media? What about the hardworking investigative journalists at these networks who aren't playing the hate game? Taibbi's broad brush kind of paints over them.
That's fair. And I think the final point from the analysis is that the book is a really strong diagnosis, but a pretty weak prescription.
A very common issue with polemics like this: he vividly describes the fire that's burning down the house. He tells you exactly who said it and why they're cashing in on the insurance. But he doesn't really give you a blueprint for how to put the fire out.
So if there's no blueprint in the book, let's try to build a small one for our listener. What's the practical takeaway? What do I do with this information so I can consume news without losing my mind?
Well, the first step is just basic media hygiene. You have to diversify your sources. If you only consume media that makes you feel good about what you already believe, you're living in a silo. You need to read things that challenge you.
But, and this is key, not in a way that's designed to just enrage you.
Right. Don't just go to the other side's rage bait site. Go to their most serious thinkers. Read the best version of their arguments, not the nut-picking that your side's media wants to show you.
Finding the craziest person on the other side and pretending they represent the whole movement.
Exactly. Don't fall for that. And the second takeaway is really a mindset shift.
What's that?
I like to call it refusing emotional conscription. Recognize when a news story or a headline is trying to manipulate your emotions instead of informing your reason. If you feel that surge of adrenaline, that devotional anger, just pause. Ask yourself, why do they want me to feel this way? Who profits from this emotion?
It's about reclaiming your own headspace. Don't let them rent space in your brain for free.
Or worse, don't let them charge you for the privilege of making you miserable.
Here is a final thought for you to mull over, something to chew on after this is done. If the news is a product designed to make you angry, and you are angry, are you the customer? Or are you the product being sold to advertisers? Because in the attention economy, your rage is the currency.
That's the question that changes everything.
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.